today on this podcast. The question for today is, should the Cleveland Browns have a name change? Well, that was a difficult question, so I looked it up. The Cleveland Browns started in 1940s, and some references say the Cleveland Browns were named after a coach named Paul Brown, who was coach for 14 years. But let's face it, no teams are named after one coach, even if he was there for 14 years. So that seems very unlikely. There are various answers as to why Cleveland Browns are named the Browns. But let's face it, back in the 1940s, everybody was focused on race and ethnicity. So you had the Redskins, you had the Indians, you had other teams, but all was based on basically where people were from. And most likely, the Browns were named the Browns because once football started integrating and putting brown-skinned people on the field, they probably were celebrating the Browns on the field, the black players. And so they called them the Cleveland Browns because initially that was kind of a novelty. Well, now that's kind of normal. We see a lot of integration on the fields, whites and blacks. But is Browns the name that should be given to Cleveland? The mascot for the Browns was an elf, a light tan elf who had brown pants. But they have since gotten rid of him, I think because it was an elf and it was lightly tanned. It might have been deemed by some racists, and now the Browns mostly have dogs, brown dogs, as their mascot. So you can see a bull mastiff, or a lab, or a German shepherd, or a Weimaraner, dressed in a football helmet, maybe a t-shirt, pants, and they're using that as the mascot. So that is their excuse for the brown, because these dogs are brown. But is it just hiding the true history of this name? Now, it's said by some that the Browns were called the Browns not because of the coach, whose name was Brown, but because of Joe Louis, who was a great celebrity back in his day. And so they named it the Cleveland Browns after him. What's the truth? Who knows? But more than likely, it was named after skin color, and they would have named it the Browns because Joe Louis was called the Brown Bomber. Back in the 40s, 50s, and even 60s, darker-skinned blacks were called brownie or browns, and they were compared to lighter-skinned blacks who were not called brownie usually. This division in the African American skin color was basically due to fears by whites. Whites trusted lighter-skinned browns more than they trusted darker-skinned brown people. Very similar to what we see today. So this division was generations old. It started out in slavery when the lighter-skinned brown people, or people who looked white, would get the easier, or maybe not easier, but they would get the jobs inside the house, and the darker skinned people would work out in the fields and do outside work in the sun. So that division separated blacks, and there was jealousy because people who worked out in the sun and did the hard plantation work were often upset because they saw there was a pattern of favoring lighter-skinned blacks in the house or with the children of the master, while the outside blacks were treated more harshly and always were relegated to slave quarters. So are the Cleveland Browns just a continuation of this division between darker brown blacks versus lighter brown blacks that was created through slavery? For whatever reason, this might be a good time to rethink the name of the Cleveland football team. Should it be called the Cleveland Browns? Or should it be something more that they seem to have tended towards in more recent years, where they're basically going for the symbol of a dog? So maybe it should be the Cleveland Dogs, or the Cleveland Rottweilers, or the Cleveland Bulldogs, or the Cleveland Guards, as with guard dog. Something like that, because it doesn't really make sense calling it the Cleveland Browns when your mascot is a dog. So what do you think? Should Cleveland change their name from the Browns to something that fits their actual mascot, which is a dog? Or do you think that this name is not racist and they should continue calling themselves the Cleveland Browns? If you think they should change the name, vote by liking this, and if you think they should not, do a thumbs down.